everyone's seen a movie that's just chugging along nicely, and then out of nowhere a scene just unfolds that feels so jarringly out of place that it takes you out of the film for at least a few minutes. And though a few of the scenes that are on this list were clearly written to intentionally clash with the rest of the film, for the most part, they're just distracting and out of step with everything else. Occasionally for the better, but mostly for the worst. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is Whatculture.com, and these are the most out of place scenes in movie history. Alan's Dream, Jurassic Park 3. So after falling asleep during the flight to the land of the dinosaurs, Alan Grant dreams that the plane has been abandoned mid-air, and as he turns around, he's met by a velociraptor which shouts "Alan" with a human voice, causing him to wake up safely on board the plane in reality. Now why this is out of place is because even though Jurassic Park 3 is mostly a bad movie with its fair share of goofy moments, the phone in the T-Rex's stomach, for example, is just weird, to stoop to the level of including an animatronic dinosaur that speaks to Alan is just too much. Though this scene is mercifully brief and the talking dinosaur appears for just a few seconds, it's so misguided on a tonal and directorial level that it's been impossible to forget about ever since.
America gets torn in two. Chappie. Longtime Blomkamp collaborator Sharlto Copley voices the titular character, a decommissioned enforcement robot and the first true AI, who falls in love with Di Antwoord of all people, reluctantly turning to a life of crime on the streets of Johannesburg. On this journey, America, one of Chappie's teachers and co-conspirators, teaches the young robot to wear bling, walk with an attitude, and put people to sleep. At least until the third act, that is, when Hugh Grant's villainous engineer, Vincent Moore, stomps him using his remote-controlled moose robot. In a sequence better suited to a Saw movie than this edgy yet frequently happy-go-lucky Genesis story, the moose grips America with a robot claw and tears him in half before splattering his torso on the building behind. Little in the film up until this point prepares you for such a grim and sudden death of a supporting character. Tonally, it doesn't match any of the action, emotion, or visuals surrounding it, and it leaves the audience reeling. Techno Diva Dance, The Fifth Element. 23rd century NYC cabbie Corbin Dallas teams up with Lilu, the embodiment of the sacred fifth element, to keep an ancient planet-eating cosmic force from destroying the world. Calamity ensues. While the film features many wild and wacky digressions, none are stranger than the space opera sequence. Corbin and Lilu follow a quest for some sacred stones, just go with it, to a blue diva called Plava Laguna. But before they can reclaim it, they, and we, are forced to sit through an excruciating few minutes of space opera. Techno music kicks in, the diva throws some shapes, and the audience cringe from behind their fingers. The scene is awkward, uncomfortable, and seriously out of place, which is saying a lot for a film with Chris Tucker's loud, flamboyant, intergalactic talk show host going down on an air hostess during takeoff.
Pancakes, Cabin Fever. So here, the central group of college graduates find themselves falling victim to flesh-eating bacteria, and one of the group, Bert, decides to drive to the nearest convenience store to summon help. Here he's met by an eccentric young boy, Dennis, who begins screaming pancakes at Bert while performing slow-motion karate moves and eventually biting Bert on the hand. Hilariously, Dennis's father blames Bert for what happens and runs him off with a rifle. Now, Eli Roth's cult classic body horror movie is pretty weird by any conventional metric, but even so, this scene is especially bizarre. But it gets even weirder when you hear the real-life story behind this scene. You see, it was entirely improvised on the spot. Yeah, now suddenly, it sticks out even more.
Tri-breasted prostitute. Total Recall, 1990. Arnold Schwarzenegger stars as Douglas Quaid, a construction worker whose memory implant fantasy of being a secret agent on a mission to Mars seems to be coming true, blurring the lines between fiction and reality. Along the way, he encounters many wonders of a technologically advanced yet persistently unequal society, but perhaps none more striking than a triple-breasted mutant prostitute. Played by Lycia Naff, the futuristic lady of the night is offered up to Arnie by her pimp, and she opens her blouse to show him the goods, laughing like Janice from Friends. Now, far be it for us to poo-poo a bit of space nudity, but this scene feels shoehorned into the film. Unless there's a deeper, more artistic element at play that we're missing somehow? Unfortunately, no, I don't think so. This film establishes a pattern for the film where most female characters are presented as sexualized objects, ostracized freaks, or both. Naff came to regret taking the part as it left her feeling overexposed and deeply unsexy, and it isn't difficult to see why.
Kate doesn't like Christmas. Gremlins. So in Gremlins, protagonist Billy's girlfriend Kate grimly explains why she hates Christmas so much, and that's because that when she was 9 years old, her father went missing on Christmas Eve. Several days later, a young Kate noticed an odd smell coming from the fireplace where his corpse was discovered, having slipped and fallen in the chimney while dressed as Father Christmas in an attempt to surprise Kate, which he definitely did, and he broke his neck and died instantly. So why this is totally out of place in Joe Dante's classic Christmas film is that while this is a card-carrying dark comedy in every fiber of its being, this was still a major tonal left turn, making for an intentionally awkward, out-of-place monologue that is funny and unforgettable precisely because it's so damn unexpected. It's a fantastic scene, and the actress Phoebe Cates totally gives it beans, but even in its other dark moments, the film never gets anywhere near this grim.
Jazz dancing emo Peter, Spider-Man 3. Sam Raimi may be back in the superhero fold with Multiverse of Madness, but let's not forget the film that got him kicked out in the first place, Spider-Man 3. Despite the film's inability to control its characters and narrative flow, it manages its tone fairly well. At least until Peter Parker gets infected by the Venom symbiote and things go a little odd. He's so bad, in fact, he's going to dance in the street like your dad at a wedding. Buying a black suit and dancing on the pavement, taking his girlfriend to a jazz club and dancing on the tables, and generally dancing his way into our worst Spidey-related nightmares. Peter goes full cringe in a sequence that is unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Sure, this is Raimi's humor down to a T, but god damn it, Sam, there's a time and a place. Did this scene sound the death knell for the series? That's not for us to say, but what we can say is that Raimi was planning on making a fourth film and, well, that was 15 years and 2 additional Spider-Men ago.
The Doctor shoots himself. World War Z. So as hero Jerry and his team are attacked by a zombie horde, virologist Dr. Fazbach panics and flees towards the interior of their plane, but the wet ramp causes him to slip and accidentally discharge his gun, blowing his own brains out in the process. Now this is such a hilariously silly moment in an otherwise grimly serious film that of course it feels like it's totally out of place. The intent here was probably to emphasize the messy chaos of the scenario and how dangerous it is to put a gun in an untrained civilian's hands, but the direction ultimately made this unintentionally laughable. Though it's entirely believable that somebody might die like this if a zombie invasion ever happened in real life, this doesn't mean it will play convincingly on screen, as this utterly preposterous scene proves.
Macaroni cheese cheddar goblin, Mandy. Cage plays Red Miller, a lumber worker whose girlfriend Mandy is kidnapped and killed by a religious cult, and who therefore must enact a campaign of brutal vengeance. It's the 80s, the world has an ominous neon glow, and pretty much anything goes, whether that be chainsaw duels, coke-snorting demon bikers, or a green goblin that projectile vomits macaroni cheese. Trust me, this movie's really good though. The creepy little green guy appears on television during a tense and crucial point in Red's emotional journey, treating 2 children to some macaroni chunder. The scene is undeniably brilliant, but it comes at a strange time, right after Red has watched his beloved burn to death in front of him, and bears little resemblance to the rest of the film. But no matter how out of place he is, Cheddar Goblin will always have a seat at our table.
Elvis's skeleton, RoboCop 2. So shortly before RoboCop first meets villainous Kane, he scours Kane's warehouse lair and discovers a weird shrine to Elvis Presley, containing pictures of the king, one of his guitars, and even what seems to be Presley's corpse itself. So why is this out of place? Well, because Elvis frickin' Presley's corpse makes a cameo and it's never explained or elaborated on, that is why. Even with the RoboCop series' penchant for satire, this was totally bonkers. And though some deleted scenes do delve deeper into Kane's love for Elvis, considering that 99% of viewers won't care enough to dig this deep, they're destined to be left with eyebrows thoroughly and definitely raised.
Shoehorned Joker, the Batman. Taking us back to Batman's early days, Robert Pattinson plays an unrefined junior bat who has lots of unresolved parent-based angst and only half a utility belt to help deal with it. As his opposite, Paul Dano is the Riddler, a genius incel with a chaotic plan to raise Gotham. Needless to say, Batman puts him in Arkham and throws away the key. But in one of the film's most jarring sequences, Riddler plays whispers with the inmate in the cell next door, Barry Keoghan's wonky-toothed yokel Joker. The deleted scene of Batman meeting Joker goes a long way to explaining why the Riddler-Joker scene exists in the first place, but the very fact that they didn't include the former should have seen the impetus needed to nix the Clown Prince of Crime's inclusion altogether. As it stands, the scene feels shoehorned in, serving no purpose other than to tease lucrative sequel bait. Worse than that though, it actually robs the Riddler of some of his mystique and has him playing subservient second fiddle to a character who isn't even in the film.
Ray gets sexual favors from a ghost, Ghostbusters. So during a mid-film montage, Ray has a dream that he's receiving, let's just call it what it is, a blowjob from a beautiful female ghost. And though Ghostbusters does have a thoroughly sarcastic, often sour tone, it's ultimately still aimed at kids as much as adults. So it's pretty incredible that the director managed to get away with this rather crude and unsubtle sex gag. Granted, if you grew up in the 1980s, this scene most likely flew over your head and resulted in a hilarious moment of realization many years later. But still, it feels like it doesn't really fit in with the rest of the film. Somewhat unsurprisingly, Ray's ghostly BJ is actually trimmed down from a much longer deleted scene. And while the director cut the rest of it, he just couldn't bring himself to lose the image of a cross-eyed Dan Aykroyd getting noshed off by some invisible woman.
Girl power. Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame brought the Infinity Saga to a definitive close in 2019, bringing the entire roster of MC heroes back to our screens to defeat Thanos. While the Earth's mightiest heroes triumphed, the film also delivered with many characters we'd spent the previous decade growing to love, including the original female Avenger, Black Widow. Thankfully, unlike a decade ago, there are plenty more well-developed female heroes to fill her shoes, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the film's final battle against Thanos. Unfortunately, the best and brightest at Disney and Marvel got together and decided the only way to showcase this was to have all the major female characters to assemble in a row in the midst of battle, trading lines to a swell of inspirational music. Host note here, I actually love this scene, but let's keep going. What's intended to be a badass female affirming scene comes off as the cheesiest, hammiest, most manufactured moment the MCU films have ever brought us. And that's saying a lot, considering some of them rely almost solely on cheese, gloss, and soap opera drama to pad their runtime.
I'm the party pooper. Kindergarten Cop. The classic Arnold Schwarzenegger starring comedy opens up with a lengthy prologue of sorts where Detective John Kimball tracks down a drug lord and catches him murdering an informant red-handed. In the next scene, Kimball heads to a dirty nightclub to find the woman who witnessed his act, resulting in an intense gunfight, with Kimball shotgunning the joint to pieces. So why is this out of place? Well, at its core, it's supposed to be a kid-friendly comedy about Arnie playing against type as a teacher, but the tone of the film's opening feels like it belongs in an R-rated, hard-boiled thriller rather than a PG-13 comedy. While the movie does get serious again for its final stretch as Kimball faces off against the drug lord once more, the overwhelming majority of the film is fairly frothy comedy that has little to do with drug kingpins, murder, and comically oversized weaponry. It's honestly pretty shocking that the film's intro wasn't softened in the scripting stage, but given that the film's final $200 million box office, its severe tonal whiplash didn't seem to bother audiences that much. Carol Marcus strips. Star Trek Into Darkness. As Dr. Carol Marcus reels off an exposition dump to Captain Kirk, she instructs him to turn around while she gets changed. Now, unsurprisingly, Kirk can't help himself and turns back around seconds later to catch an eyeful of Marcus in her underwear, much to her chagrin. Now, this is easily one of the most eye-rollingly shoehorned eye candy scenes from any major Hollywood movie in the last century, and feels like something that you'd expect more from Transformers than from Star Trek. Can't Alice Eve just be a good actress who plays a smart, resourceful woman? Instead, she's reduced to a lingerie model in this sequence, with J.J. Abrams' painfully obvious framing making it that much more pandering. Now, to their very mild credit, writer Damon Lindelof apologized for the scene and Abrams admitted that it didn't play right, but it still musters a pretty hard cringe every single time.
Flying Space Leia. Star Wars The Last Jedi. Star Wars The Last Jedi, or Episode 8, depending on what neck of the woods you hail from, enraged some longtime fans upon release and pleased plenty of others, with director Rian Johnson and actor Kelly Marie Tran unfairly catching most of the flack. After Sith apprentice Kylo Ren launches an attack on his mother, Leia Organa's ship, Leia is blown out into space in a fireball of debris. So she's a goner, right? Wrong. After surviving for a good minute or so in the vacuum of space, her hand twitches, her eyes flick open, and she force flies herself to safety. The power, the action, and the scene don't jive with anything in the Star Wars universe. Neither the lore, the canon, nor even the fundamental laws of chemistry, biology, or physics. We discovered in The Rise of Skywalker that Leia trained as a Jedi under Luke, and even has her own lightsaber. But this doesn't help land the whole space flying thing any better. If they could just zoom around the freezing cold void like Superman, why didn't Luke or Obi-Wan just zoom up to the Death Star's exhaust port with a thermal detonator suppository?
Cool beans. Hot Rod. So after Rod has a falling out with his half-brother Kevin, Rod heads to his room to apologize. After Kevin accepts the apology and asks, "So, cool beans?" the pair launch into a peculiar rap battle of sorts, parroting cool beans back to one another, which is clearly cut together from countless alternate takes as a beat begins to creep in and take things to the next level. So why is this out of place? Well, even for the most surreal standards of a movie from the Lonely Island, this was utterly mad and came totally out of nowhere compared to the rest of the movie. Amusingly, it was almost left out of the film until it was screened for test audiences, who generally scored it as one of their favorite scenes in the entire flick. It's a scene that works precisely because it's so sudden and unexpected. And let's be honest, it's pretty much the single moment that everyone remembers from Hot Rod.